He was a billionaire who had everything except the woman he loved. For 10 years he believed his wife was gone forever, until one day a $50 painting revealed her face. What he uncovered next would change his life and his family forever. Michael Anderson stood by the floor-to-ceiling window of his Manhattan penthouse, staring at the city lights that twinkled like stars below. The skyline was breathtaking, yet it felt hollow to him. 10 years had passed since Helen, his beloved wife, had been taken from him by what he believed was a tragic accident. His fortune had grown, but so had the emptiness inside. He had everything money could buy, except the one thing he truly wanted back. Every morning, Michael followed the same routine. He woke in silence, walked through his marble-floored halls, and sat at a dining table meant for a family that no longer existed. The staff respected his quietness, never daring to ask questions about the sadness in his eyes. His empire of luxury hotels demanded his focus, yet his heart wasn't in it. Success felt meaningless when celebrated alone. At board meetings, executives admired his sharp mind and decisive leadership. Yet behind the mask of control, Michael fought an endless storm of grief. He never remarried, never allowed himself to feel close to anyone again. His friends urged him to move on. But how do you move on from the only love that defined your very soul? He carried Helen's memory like a locked box, untouched but ever present. Evenings were the hardest. Michael would pour himself a glass of bourbon and sit in his library surrounded by rare books and silence. Sometimes he would take out the last photo he had of Helen, her smile radiant, her hand in his. "You should be here," he whispered into the night. But no answer ever came. The city outside roared with life, while his own remained frozen in time. Despite his wealth, Michael often walked the streets alone. He claimed it cleared his mind, though deep inside, he longed for a connection he could not name. Strangers passed by, unaware of the billionaire in their midst, a man whose fortune could buy anything but peace. The irony was not lost on him. The richest man in the room was also the loneliest. He thought often of destiny and how cruel it could be. Why had it taken Helen so soon? Why had it left him with so many questions and so few answers? Grief had no timeline, and his heart refused to heal. In moments of solitude, Michael sometimes wondered if Helen had left behind signs he had simply missed. Business trips and charity galas kept him busy, but they were distractions, not passions. His eyes never lit up with joy, only with obligation. Colleagues described him as disciplined, even cold, but they didn't know the truth. Michael had given his warmth away to someone who never returned. His soul remained chained to a memory. Still, part of him refused to let go completely. He visited the same cafe Helen used to love, sitting at her favorite corner table. He listened to the same records they once danced to, imagining her hand still in his. The ache in his chest was familiar, but it was also a cruel reminder that she was gone. Yet destiny, as Michael would soon discover, had plans of its own. Life had a way of circling back, of placing forgotten pieces of the past right in front of him when he least expected it. The spark of change was closer than he imagined. It would not come in a boardroom, nor in the glitter of his penthouse life. It would begin in the most unlikely of places, a cluttered flea market on a quiet Brooklyn street where fate had been patiently waiting for a decade to reveal itself once more. If this story has already touched your heart, don't miss what comes next. Subscribe now and join us on this emotional journey, because sometimes the smallest moments hide the biggest truths. On a gray Saturday morning, Michael wandered through Brooklyn, his driver trailing behind discreetly. The air was thick with the smell of roasted chestnuts and old paperbacks. Vendors shouted prices, children tugged at their parents' sleeves, and the world felt alive in a way Michael hadn't experienced in years. He didn't belong here, but something had drawn him. He stopped at a small stand stacked with second-hand frames and oil paintings. Dust clung to every corner, and the colors were faded, but one canvas caught his eye. The seller, an elderly man with paint-stained fingers, smiled knowingly. "That one's been here for months," he said. "Take it off my hands for $50. Michael raised an eyebrow but decided to buy it. The painting was wrapped in brown paper, barely held together with twine. Michael felt no urgency to look at it immediately. Instead, he carried it with him like a mystery waiting to be solved. Something about the weight in his hands stirred curiosity deep inside him, as if his heart already knew what his mind did not. Later that evening, back at his penthouse, Michael placed the painting on a stand in his library. The room was quiet, lit only by the soft glow of a fireplace. Slowly, he removed the paper wrapping, letting it fall to the floor. His breath caught in his chest as the image revealed itself. It was Helen. Her face stared back at him, painted with remarkable detail, the same gentle eyes, the same curve of her lips, the same expression he had kissed countless times. Michael staggered back, his glass of bourbon slipping from his hand and shattering on the floor. He rubbed his eyes, certain it had to be a hallucination. But no, it was her. The painting was aged, but beautifully preserved. Her likeness was undeniable. He reached out trembling fingers to touch the canvas, almost expecting it to be warm to the touch. "Helen," he whispered, his voice breaking for the first time in years. His heart pounded with a mixture of fear, grief, and impossible hope. Questions swarmed his mind. Who had painted this? How had they captured her so perfectly? And why had the portrait been hidden in a forgotten flea market, sold like any other trinket? The mystery was unbearable, yet he couldn't look away. He felt both terrified and alive again, emotions colliding like a storm. The shock left him pacing the room, hands buried in his hair. If this painting existed, then maybe Helen's story wasn't what he had believed. Maybe the past held secrets no one dared to tell him. He needed answers, and he would stop at nothing to find them. That night, Michael barely slept. The painting remained propped against the wall, silently staring at him, refusing to let him rest. And though exhaustion clouded his body, his mind burned with one certainty. This was not the end of Helen's story. This was only the beginning. Michael sat in his study long after midnight, the painting resting against the wall as if silently judging him. Every time he looked at it, he felt a rush of emotions he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. The face on the canvas wasn't just similar to Helen's, it was her, down to the smallest detail. His heart told him this was no coincidence, though his mind struggled to believe. The more he stared at the portrait, the more memories came flooding back. He remembered the sound of her laughter echoing through their penthouse, the way she hummed softly when cooking, and how her perfume lingered even after she left a room. Seeing her face again was like breathing air after drowning for a decade. It awakened a piece of him he thought had died. Michael's rational side tried to dismiss it. Perhaps the artist had simply painted a woman who looked like Helen, a chance resemblance. But something inside him rebelled at that thought. The expression, the eyes, even the faint scar near her chin, details only someone close could have known. This painting wasn't random. It was personal. Determined to uncover the truth, Michael poured himself another drink and sat at his desk. He researched the signature faintly etched in the corner of the canvas. Though barely legible, the name appeared to be Claire H. The discovery sent a jolt through him. Who was this Claire? And why had she chosen Helen as her subject? By dawn, Michael knew he couldn't ignore it. For years he had buried his grief and avoided questions about Helen's death. But now, the universe had forced his hand. This painting was a message, one he couldn't turn away from. For the first time in a decade, he felt a fragile spark of hope flickering inside him. The following afternoon, Michael instructed his driver to take him to Brooklyn. With the painting carefully wrapped, he carried it like a sacred relic. The address he had uncovered led him to a small, weathered building covered in ivy. A hand-painted sign read, Claire Hastings, Studio and Gallery. His chest tightened as he stepped inside, unsure of what awaited him. The studio smelled of oil paint and turpentine, with canvases scattered in every direction. Colorful works of art leaned against walls, depicting landscapes, faces, and abstract emotions. At the center of the room, a young woman with long chestnut hair stood by an easel, her hands covered in paint. She turned as the door creaked open, her eyes meeting Michael's with guarded curiosity. Michael wasted no time. He unwrapped the painting and held it up. "This," he said firmly, his voice trembling. "Did you paint this?" Claire's face drained of color, and she froze. For a long moment she said nothing, her eyes darting between Michael and the portrait. Then, almost in a whisper, she replied, "Where did you find it?" Her reaction confirmed what Michael already suspected. This was no coincidence. Claire knew something about the painting, maybe even about Helen. But why was she so startled? Why had she painted his wife's likeness so precisely? The questions tumbled through his mind, each one heavier than the last. Claire avoided his gaze and busied herself with cleaning her brushes. "It's just a painting," she muttered, though her voice betrayed unease. Michael wasn't convinced. He had built an empire on reading people, and he knew when someone was hiding something. Whatever secret this young artist carried, it was directly tied to Helen, and Michael was determined to uncover it. Michael studied Claire carefully, noticing the way her hands trembled as she set down her brushes. She looked no older than her mid-20s, yet there was something about her eyes, an old sadness, as though she carried secrets far heavier than her age should allow. The silence between them stretched, filled only by the faint dripping of paint from her brushes. "I need to know who this woman is to you," Michael pressed, lifting the painting slightly higher. "Her name was Helen Anderson. She was my wife." At the mention of Helen's name, Claire's lips parted and her breath hitched. For an instant, Michael thought he saw recognition flicker across her face, but she quickly looked away, avoiding his gaze. Claire busied herself by rearranging supplies on a nearby shelf, though her movements were nervous and rushed. "I paint many faces," she said softly, as though rehearsed. "Sometimes they just come to me. I don't always know why." Michael stepped closer, unwilling to accept such a vague answer. His instincts told him she knew more than she was letting on. "Faces don't just come to you like this," he argued. "This is Helen down to the smallest detail. You painted someone you knew, or someone who knew her. Which is it?" His voice was steady, but beneath it was desperation. For years, Michael had begged for signs, and now one stood before him trembling and silent. Finally, Claire looked up, her eyes glossy with emotion she could no longer mask. "Please," she whispered, her voice cracking. "You don't understand. Some truths can destroy the people who go looking for them." Her warning sent a chill through Michael's veins, but instead of discouraging him, it fueled his determination. Whatever secret she held, he was ready to face it. Leaving Claire's studio, Michael carried the painting under his arm like a burden he couldn't put down. His driver glanced at him in the rearview mirror, but wisely said nothing. Back in Manhattan, Michael retreated to his penthouse, pouring himself a drink he didn't taste. His mind swirled with questions. Claire's fear was real, and it only deepened the mystery. The next day, Michael began calling old acquaintances, collectors, and contacts in the art world. Most knew nothing about Claire Hastings, except that she was a rising talent with an unusual gift for portraits. A few mentioned her preference for anonymity, rarely giving interviews or explaining her inspirations. That secrecy only made Michael more restless. Seeking another perspective, Michael met with Edward, his longtime business partner and closest confidant. Over lunch in a private Manhattan club, Michael revealed the painting and Claire's strange reaction. Edward frowned deeply, advising him to let the past rest. "You're chasing shadows, Michael," he warned. "Digging this up will only reopen wounds you've worked so hard to heal." But Michael knew better. He had never healed. He had only buried his grief beneath layers of work and wealth. Edward's caution struck him as unusual, almost too forceful. It planted a seed of suspicion that his friend might know more than he admitted. Still, Michael kept his doubts quiet, watching Edward carefully as he avoided eye contact. That night, Michael returned to the portrait, studying Helen's eyes until sleep eluded him. He whispered promises into the silence, vowing not to stop until he discovered the truth. For the first time in years, he felt alive, not because of his fortune or power, but because of the fragile thread of hope pulling him back toward the woman he had loved. News of Michael's strange behavior began to spread among business circles. His sudden obsession with a painting raised eyebrows, especially with Richard Coleman, a ruthless rival in the luxury hotel industry. Richard had always envied Michael's empire, and any sign of weakness was an opportunity. When he heard whispers that Michael was digging into the past, he grew intrigued. Richard reached out under the guise of friendship, inviting Michael to dinner at an upscale Manhattan restaurant. Over steak and wine, Richard pressed casually, asking why Michael had been seen in Brooklyn's flea markets and art studios. Michael kept his answers vague, unwilling to expose the truth. Still, Richard's sharp eyes noticed the tension in his voice. "Careful where you dig, old friend," Richard warned with a smirk, swirling his glass of wine. "Sometimes the past is better left buried." His tone was playful, but there was an edge of menace behind his words. Michael felt a chill creep through him, as though Richard knew more than he should. The warning only deepened his resolve. Later that night, Michael returned home unsettled. Richard had always been competitive, but this was different. His curiosity and veiled threats hinted at a connection between him and Helen's disappearance. Michael realized that his search for answers was no longer just personal, it had attracted dangerous attention from powerful enemies. For the first time, Michael considered the possibility that Helen's death had not been an accident at all. If Richard was involved, then uncovering the truth wasn't just about finding closure, it was about exposing a crime. The stakes had grown higher than he ever imagined, and he knew he could no longer trust anyone completely. In the following weeks, Michael threw himself deeper into the mystery, neglecting board meetings and business deals. His executives grew concerned, but he brushed off their questions. He spent late nights in his study, connecting dots on scraps of paper, tracing names, and piecing together fragments of Helen's past. His empire began to tremble under his absence. Richard took notice, spreading rumors that Michael had lost his edge. The stock prices of Anderson hotels dipped slightly, adding pressure from shareholders. Edward urged Michael to stop, warning that his obsession was costing him not only his fortune, but also his sanity. Yet Michael's answer was always the same. If Helen is alive, nothing else matters. Sleep became a luxury Michael could not afford. Every time he closed his eyes, Helen's painted face haunted him, begging him to keep searching. He returned to Claire's studio several times, but she refused to answer his questions. Her silence spoke louder than words, fueling his determination. Michael knew the truth was close, just out of reach. Strange incidents began to occur. A car followed him late at night, its headlights lingering too long. Important files in his office went missing, only to reappear in odd places. Anonymous phone calls echoed with static before cutting off. Michael wasn't paranoid he was being watched. Someone didn't want him to uncover the truth. Despite the threats, Michael's resolve only hardened. If powerful men like Richard were involved, then his search for Helen was not just about love, it was about justice. He was risking everything: his reputation, his empire, even his life. Yet for the first time in years, Michael felt truly alive, driven by a fire that wealth alone could never ignite. Michael returned once more to Claire's studio, this time refusing to leave without answers. He placed the portrait of Helen on the easel in front of her and stood silently waiting. Claire's hands shook as she set down her brush. She looked cornered, her eyes darting between Michael and the painting, as though debating whether to reveal the truth or protect it. Finally, tears welled in her eyes. "She's not just a woman I painted," Claire admitted, her voice trembling. "She's my mother." Michael's heart pounded violently at the words, each syllable cutting through the years of grief. He could hardly breathe as he tried to process what he was hearing. The room seemed to tilt around him. Claire went on, explaining that Helen had never died. She had disappeared deliberately, forced to hide because of threats from Richard Coleman, a man who had power and influence far beyond what Michael ever knew. For years, Helen had lived in secrecy, raising Claire away from danger. The portrait was Claire's way of keeping her mother's memory alive. Michael's world collapsed and rebuilt itself in the span of minutes. Anger, relief, and betrayal clashed violently inside him. Why hadn't Helen reached out? Why had she let him mourn her for a decade? And yet, underneath the storm of emotions, hope burned brighter than ever. If Helen was alive, there was still a chance to find her. Claire warned him again. "If you keep digging, you'll put us all at risk. Richard won't stop until he destroys you." But Michael had already made his choice. No threat, no betrayal, no risk could outweigh the possibility of seeing Helen again. He left the studio with a new mission: to uncover Helen's hiding place no matter the cost. Michael turned to the one person he thought he could trust, Edward. Sitting across from him in the private lounge of their hotel headquarters, Michael revealed Claire's confession. Edward's face went pale and his hands gripped his glass too tightly. His silence lasted too long, and Michael felt the first spark of suspicion ignite. When Edward finally spoke, his words were halting. "Michael, you don't understand. I knew Helen was alive. I just thought it was best you never found out." The confession hit Michael harder than any betrayal before. His closest friend, the man who had stood by him through years of grief, had been complicit in keeping Helen hidden. Anger surged through him. "You let me drown in misery for 10 years, and you said nothing. You watched me grieve, bury myself in work, lose all purpose, and you said nothing." Michael's voice cracked with fury. Edward looked away, ashamed, insisting he had only wanted to protect him from dangers beyond his control. But Michael couldn't accept it. Friendship meant loyalty, and Edward had chosen deception instead. Worse, his secrecy hinted at a deeper involvement. Was Edward protecting Michael or protecting himself? The lines blurred, and the man Michael once trusted more than anyone now seemed like another obstacle in his path. Michael left the meeting seething, vowing never to rely on Edward again. He had lost faith in the people closest to him, but he had also gained something far stronger: determination. If everyone around him was willing to lie, then he would chase the truth alone. And this time, nothing, not betrayal, not Richard, not even fear, would stop him. Michael's investigation grew more dangerous with each passing day. He followed leads across Brooklyn, asking questions in places where people spoke in whispers. The closer he got to Helen's whereabouts, the more resistance he met. And then one night his worst fear came true. Helen was taken again, ripped from the shadows where she had been hiding. The message arrived in the form of a single envelope slid under Michael's penthouse door. Inside was a photograph of Helen, bound and terrified, with a note scrawled in bold ink: "Stop searching, or she disappears forever." His blood ran cold. The weight of the threat pressed down on him, making every breath feel like fire. Michael knew instantly who was behind it: Richard Coleman. The rival had crossed a line that turned business rivalry into personal warfare. This was no longer about profits or pride. It was about power, control, and the cruelty of a man who thrived on fear. Michael clenched the photograph in his fists, vowing to fight back. He contacted Claire immediately, showing her the picture. Tears streamed down her face, but her grief quickly transformed into resolve. "We can't give up," she said firmly. "My mother trusted me to survive, and now we have to fight for her." Her determination gave Michael strength he thought he had lost. The kidnapping was the breaking point. For years, Michael had been a prisoner of grief. Now, Richard had declared war on the one thing Michael valued above all else: love. No amount of money, influence, or power could silence his will. He would risk everything: fortune, reputation, even his life, to bring Helen home. The days following Helen's abduction blurred into a haze of fear and rage. Michael barely slept, poring over security footage, financial records, and contacts who might betray Richard's location. Every lead felt like smoke slipping through his fingers. The city that once felt alive now seemed hostile, every shadow hiding danger. Doubt gnawed at him during the quiet hours. For the first time, he feared failure. What if he was already too late? What if Helen had suffered all these years only to be taken again, this time forever? The thought of losing her twice was unbearable, threatening to break him from within. Claire refused to let him surrender to despair. She became his anchor, her youthful courage balancing his weary determination. "You've built empires out of nothing," she reminded him. "Now use that same strength to save her." Her words reignited his spirit, reminding him that love was stronger than fear. Edward, perhaps out of guilt, returned to Michael's side with information. He confessed that Richard had safe houses across the city, one of them in Queens. Michael was torn between rage at his betrayal and desperation for any lead. Trusting Edward was a risk, but Michael knew he had no choice but to act. As he prepared to face Richard head-on, Michael felt a clarity he hadn't known in years. He was no longer simply a businessman chasing profits or a widower clinging to grief. He was a husband, fighting for his wife, a father protecting his daughter, and a man willing to burn his world to ashes for love. Michael arrived in Queens under the cover of night, his heart pounding like a war drum. Edward's information had led him to a warehouse by the docks, its windows dark, its walls silent. The air smelled of salt water and rust, a fitting backdrop for the storm about to unfold. Armed only with courage and strategy, he stepped into enemy territory. Inside, shadows loomed over crates stacked high, and the sound of footsteps echoed across the floor. Richard Coleman stood at the center, flanked by armed men, his smirk cutting through the darkness. "You should have stayed in your golden tower, Anderson," Richard sneered. "Now you'll lose everything again." His words dripped with cruelty, savoring Michael's torment. Michael refused to falter. "You've taken my fortune, my peace, and my wife. But you will not take my soul," he declared, his voice steady. Using quick thinking, he activated a hidden recording device, broadcasting Richard's confession to authorities waiting outside. For once, Michael's business cunning became his sharpest weapon. A gunfight erupted, chaos exploding within the warehouse. Michael ducked behind crates, adrenaline surging through him. Though bullets whizzed past, he kept his eyes on Helen, tied to a chair in the corner. Every risk he took was for her, every breath driven by the promise of reunion. The line between life and death blurred in the firestorm. When the police stormed in, Richard's empire crumbled. He was dragged away screaming, his threats echoing into the night. Michael rushed to Helen, untying her bonds with trembling hands. She collapsed into his arms, her tears wetting his shirt. "I thought I lost you forever," she whispered. Michael held her tightly, whispering back, "Not anymore. Never again." The aftermath was quiet compared to the storm. Michael brought Helen back to Manhattan, the city lights welcoming her like an old friend. In the safety of his penthouse, she walked the halls she once knew, her fingers grazing the walls as though to confirm they were real. Michael watched her every move, afraid that if he blinked, she might vanish again. Their reunion was bittersweet. Helen confessed the truth. She had faked her death to protect Claire from Richard's wrath. "I wanted to tell you," she sobbed. "But if Richard knew you were involved, he would have destroyed you too." Her sacrifice had been born of love, but it left scars that both of them carried. Michael's anger dissolved into understanding. Yes, she had left him in darkness, but she had done so to keep their daughter safe. He kissed her forehead, whispering promises of forgiveness and new beginnings. For the first time in 10 years, he felt the weight of grief lift, replaced by a warmth he thought was lost forever. Claire joined them, her presence bridging the gap between past and future. She embraced her mother tightly, then turned to Michael with cautious hope. "We can finally be a family," she said softly. Her words brought tears to Michael's eyes, a dream he had long abandoned now blossoming before him. Together they sat by the window overlooking the city, the three of them bound by love, pain, and survival. The night outside was alive, but inside their home, peace reigned. Michael knew there would be challenges ahead, but he no longer feared them. With Helen and Claire by his side, he had everything he needed to face tomorrow. In the weeks that followed Richard's arrest, the Anderson family slowly pieced their lives back together. Michael resumed his work at Anderson Hotels, but this time with a renewed sense of purpose. No longer driven solely by profit, he invested in projects that uplifted communities, inspired by Helen's strength and Claire's creativity. His empire became not just a symbol of wealth, but of resilience. Helen adjusted to life outside the shadows, learning to live freely again. She rediscovered joys she had once abandoned: morning walks in Central Park, late-night dinners with Michael, and the simple comfort of being home. Though scars remained from years in hiding, she carried herself with a quiet grace that reminded Michael why he had fallen in love with her. Claire thrived in her art, her portraits now gaining attention across New York's galleries. Critics admired the raw emotion in her work, unaware that every brushstroke carried pieces of her family's journey. She signed her paintings proudly, no longer hiding behind secrecy. Each canvas told the story of survival, love, and the courage to face darkness. One evening, the three of them gathered on the balcony of the penthouse, the city glowing beneath them. "We lost so much time," Helen whispered, her hand entwined with Michael's. But maybe that's what makes this moment so precious. Michael kissed her hand gently, his eyes glistening with tears. For the first time, their family felt whole. Michael realized that true wealth wasn't measured in skyscrapers or bank accounts, but in the love that survived even death's illusion. The man who once lived in grief had been reborn through hope, courage, and second chances. As the city roared below, the Andersons stood together above it all, a family finally restored, and a love unshaken by time. This story reminds us that love is stronger than time, secrets, and even loss. If it moved you, subscribe to our channel for more emotional millionaire stories and share in the comments, what would you do if a painting revealed the truth about someone you loved? Sometimes the greatest treasures are not found in money or success, but in the love we thought was lost forever. If this story touched your heart, share it, because someone out there may still believe in second chances.